Hello. The purpose of this video is to show you how you can use the pivot and unpivot features of Power Query inside Excel, and then some feature generation using calculated columns. So let's just start by getting a feel for the data. Here we have some data from a company. They think of them as like rolling up their financials, and they've provided for every month. They provided the revenue, the COGS, operating expense, and tax. And they want to get at an analysis that will allow them to answer questions like, what was the net profit margin in 2025? And then they want to be able to maybe graph the net profit margin per month across 2025 for the months in 2025. So we're going to show you how to kind of go from point A, which is where we are now, to point B, to where we could say the net profit margin is some number. So we could have we're going to have a number there. But then we're also interested in net profit margin. But we want it broken out by month. So you can imagine if we copy these all over here, we might have a table where we have month. I'm just going to remove the duplicates so I can show you the table I'm going to create. There we are. And then for each month, we'd have some number. So there's like two parts to our answer, right? We're going to have a table with month and net profit margin in the header, and then we'll have two columns, and then we'll have 12 rows, one for each month. And then the other part of the question is we want to just calculate our overall 2025 net profit margin. So first of all, if you can just pause and say, where am I going? And what's my answer going to look like? That's going to help you get from point A to point B. But now the question is, what do we have? Do we have net profit margin over here? No. What's profit margin? Profit margin is going to be equal to, so profit margin is going to be equal to profit, in this case net profit, divided by revenue. So ask yourself, which of these do we have? Well, we have revenue. We don't have net profit. Can we derive net profit from here? Yeah, we could take revenue minus COGS, minus operating expenses, minus tax, and that would get us net profit. And so we could do it right here. We could just say, well, let's just add in for January net profit. So we're going to say is equal to revenue minus the sum of all these other expense items. And there's our net profit. And then we could add another line for net profit margin for January. Copy this down there, margin, and we could say net profit margin is equal to profit margin divided by revenue. So we'd have a percentage there. But we don't want to do that for every month. I mean, if we have just 12 months, we could do that. It wouldn't take us that much time. But if we have large data sets, that's going to be very inefficient. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove those. I'm going to come back here and remove all this so it doesn't mess up our pivoting. And we're going to bring this into Power Query. So we're going to go Data, and then in Windows, there's this shortcut from table range. I had my cursor inside here, and so when I hit from table range, Excel is smart enough. I'm going to say my table has headers, notice it was smart enough to go to the outer bounds of my data. So what I'd really like to do is I want to take this account and I want to pivot it so that these values, revenue, COGS, operating expenses, and tax, are columns. So those are column headers that go across the top. So I'm going to highlight account. I'm going to go to transform and go unpivot. Actually, I'm going to call pivot. Got to keep these straight. And this says, it appears to me that you want to take the values in account and create new columns with them. Well, when you do that, what column should I get the values from to put underneath each of those new columns? And it's going to come from amount. So I click OK. There we are. Do you see how that happened? We pivoted those out. And so now we have 12 months. And what we can do here is we could then go generate new columns, and we might as well be inside Power Query. You could load it into Excel at this point and use formulas in Excel, but let's go ahead and do it inside Power Query. So we're going to add a column, and we're going to say add custom column. The first thing we want to calculate is our net profit, and that's going to be equal to our revenue minus our COGS minus our operating expenses minus our tax. That becomes our net profit. I click OK. It adds it right there. And now I can add another one to get profit margin. So net profit margin is the definition of profit margin is profit, in this case net profit, divided by revenue. And then I could go and say this is a percentage so that we have it there. And at that point, we're done creating our information model. Your book calls it an information model. You just want to generate the information you need to answer the question. And remember, our question here was what was the overall 2025 net profit margin? And the second question was, can we compare the fluctuations by month of net profit margins throughout 2025? So let's go ahead and load these in here. But first, before we do that, notice we added these two columns. Those are calculated columns. There is one column, there is one value for every row in these new columns, and it's derived from the values, the other values in the row. That's a calculated column. That's different than a measure, and we'll show you what a measure is right now. So right now we have this measure. We have this data, and let's answer our first question. It was, what was the 2025 net profit margin? Well, if we take one way to get at it, and there's several ways, if we take the average of our net profit margins, we could then say the average net profit margin for 2025 was 27.55%. We could also get at it by saying, well, our net profit margin is going to be the sum of our net profit across time divided by the sum of our revenue. And so then if we go sum of net profit, divided by sum of our revenue, you see we get something a little slightly different. And so you've always got to pay attention to which way you're doing it. And I'm not going to go into which way is correct. But you get a difference when you average across every month's net profit and when you basically sum the net profit and divide it by the sum of the revenue. So now at this point, we're going to get rid of those. That was our, well, actually we won't. That was our first answer. Right there. That was our first answer. There's our 2025 net profit margin. And to be exact, it's our average net profit margin. So if we justify that to the right so we can see it all. But then we may also want to actually generate a graph here. And there's a couple ways that we could do that. We could insert a pivot table. Going to show you, I'm just going to copy this data so that we don't blap over. We could go insert pivot table. And then we take month. And we take net profit margin. And here it doesn't, there's only one value. So if I average it, it should be the same as if I sum it. If you looked real close, they didn't change. And then once I've got a pivot table, I can click on this pivot chart under the pivot table analyze, and I could do a line chart. And then it shows me my months across time. And so one thing you may notice is with this pivot chart, it's still got the months in the right order. If I go back to my data, let's say I wanted to go take these and filter them. Oops. Actually sort them. If I sort them, they now sort alphabetically, and that's because it's treating this as text. One way we can get around that, well, there's a couple ways. We could go sort, custom sort on cell values, actually sort order, and we can do a custom list. And we can say there's already a list there for the order that months should be in there. And there we've got it ordered correctly. That's one way to do it. The other way, if I go back and sort this, is I could insert like a temp column. And there's a way to do this with date value. So basically, if we feed date value something that looks like a date, so I'm just going to go ahead and concatenate January 1st. Whoops. You get that right? Yeah, concatenate January 1st, and then that's actually a date, but it doesn't look like it. We're going to change it to a date. We'll say a long date. There we go. Or we could actually just let's do short date. I copy that down. And so now I've got the first of every month. And if I then sorted these, so let's sort these the wrong way. Oh, it's actually working this time. Let's sort these the wrong way. There we go. Let's do that one more time on our original data. So this is our temp column. We do date value. We're going to say take that value and we're going to concatenate the first to it. And so now each of these actually represent a date. So let's display them as a date. Then we could sort it this way. So obviously using Excel's automatic sort cut by a custom list would be easier. So let's just say we did a pivot table before to get at our second answer. Where was that? So we did a pivot table and it came across like this. Another way to do this is once we've got our data, we want to do net profit. So I'm going to bring this over here. This is actually net profit margin. So I'm going to bring this one over here. I'm going to cut it, paste it. And now if I highlight it like this, I get this magic box. I'm going to click on it, go to charts, and do a line chart. And you'll see the same graph. So to recap, we started with this data. It was in the tall format. We wanted to get it to the wide format. so that we could then take these columns and generate new columns using calculated fields. We generated net profit, and then we generated net profit margin. And then if we wanted to, we could bring this back in and we could unpivot it if we needed it in that format. So let's just load this back into data from table of range into Power Query. Then if we needed it back in the original format, I'm going to get rid of this one, remove column. We're just going to take all these line item columns, these accounting metrics. We're going to highlight them. We're going to go to transform, unpivot columns, and there we've got it back in the original format. We could load and close. So you can see sometimes we can do it all in Power Query. Sometimes we do it partly in Power Query, partly in Excel. Hopefully that was helpful.